Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We're here at the Humanists of Greater Portland meeting. I'm going to keep my comments really short this morning because we're going to see a movie that's going to last a little over an hour, and then followed by Dr. Jennifer Ruth, who was director of this film, coming for a lively Q&A. We always have lively Q&As here at the Humanists of Greater Portland. So I'm very much looking forward to this, but I want to welcome you. HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but the views expressed by myself, this morning's reader, the film that we'll be viewing, HGP members, and our guests at today's meeting are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. Joyce Lackey is our reader this morning, and she's going to do a short reading, but we wanted to have a little bit of our normal program. Come on in, Joyce.
Yeah. Okay. The reading today will be short, as Helen just said. So as to get quickly to the film. Since the film concerns injustice, this poem is on a related theme. Thirst After Justice by Jan Haaken. The entire object of true education is to make people not merely do the right thing, but enjoy the right things. Not merely industrious, but to love industry. Not merely learned, but to love knowledge. Not merely pure, but to love purity. Not merely just, but to hunger and thirst after justice.
Thank you, Joyce. It's my honor to introduce the film that we'll be viewing today, entitled The Palestine Exception. I'm so sorry. The Palestine Exception. It's a documentary that focuses on the wave of pro-Palestinian protests that swept across the U.S. colleges and universities in 2024. The film features professors and students as they join calls for a ceasefire and divestment from companies that do business with Israel. Dr. Jennifer Ruth and Dr. Jan Haaken directed this film, and Dr. Ruth, who is a professor at the School of Film at Portland State University, and she also writes about academic freedom in many national outlets. Dr. Ruth will be joining us. I think she's here right now. That's right. Yes. At the end of the film, Dr. Ruth will be joining us for a lively Q&A. Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for allowing us to show this film at the Humanists of Greater Portland. This film is being shown worldwide at many, many film festivals. And it's very much an honor to be showing it today. So let's watch the film, and then we'll have the Q&A that'll follow.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Never again for anyone. Never again is now. Never again for anyone. Never again is now.
All of us have had to think about what it means to do actions that are being called anti-Semitic. You know, some of us had our faces on the side of a truck that said that we were CUNY's leading anti-Semites because we had signed a letter in support of Palestinian life.
Many of the principles that we thought were more or less stable in academic communities, academic freedom, freedom to assemble, have become quite frail.
Earliest memory is like as a kid going to play with other kids. We had just moved to a new house and another kid said, go home and use the N-word. That experience of like, kind of like small town US racism really kind of stuck with me, and it really kind of emboldened owning my Palestinian identity.
I think that there's a really strong understanding that there's not an option to do nothing when faced with catastrophe. And mass civil disobedience actions, and really speaking out, breaking the apparent institutional consensus among Jews nationally that somehow we all support bombing children as a way to peace.
There's the largest open-air prison in the world, the longest lasting one. Is that look like democracy?
No!
from UCLA to Columbia, from CUNY to Portland State University. They built their own version of what we believe our education and our lives should look like.
The knowledge is out there. The genie is not going back in the bottle. In fact, the bottle is broken. And now the only question is, can they be pummeled into silence?
Okay, I have a question on Zoom that I'm going to try to read. I'd like to know how the President Abbas of the State of Palestine interacts with the leader of Hamas, who is the primary liaison with the State of Israel. Is that something you could answer?
It is not.
Okay.
So I'm not a Middle East studies expert. I'm not an expert on the history of the British Mandate and then all of the resistance and to the occupation that came later. I have expertise I'm in the School of Film, but I actually don't have expertise as a filmmaker. I really needed my partner, Jan Haaken, who had already made documentary films, to help me make this film. I actually have expertise in academic freedom and free speech in the US in higher education.
Okay.
And thus the film is about, it has to tell us what's at stake in the protest in terms of telling us what's happening to Gazans and what's happening to Palestinians in the West Bank as in terms of settler violence. But because that's what the students are protesting, but it is about that academic year, 2023, 2024, when the students rose up against a genocide and were crushed.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were. Dr. Ruth, forgive me, but I wanted to introduce you, and I did such a bad job.
Not at all. Not at all.
But this is Dr. Jennifer Ruth, who is from the the School of Film at Portland State University.
Right.
Thank you for an amazing job. Just was wonderful.
Thank you for having me, and thank you. It's really I haven't watched it in a while. We finished it in November 2024.
Oh.
We finished it really fast. And too fast, and we were exhausted. And then we had I had breast cancer and had to have a surgery around the time that we finished it. So the whirlwind of finishing it and having there were lots of screenings on campuses where there had been a strong student movement. And it was incredibly powerful and moving. And then their screenings have kind of dropped off, of course, though we've been picked up by Watermelon Pictures. And we're available for streaming on Watermelon Pictures platform. And then we're going to actually be available for streaming on Amazon Prime, which I'm really excited about because I feel like many of the screenings that happened in the 6 months after we finished were very much and in a good way, to people who supported the movement and the anti-genocide protests and movement and were critical of the way that they were being spun by mainstream media and conservative media. And that was great, but we also wanted to reach people who maybe were more centrist and confused about how to feel and whether it's anti-Semitic to support the protesters so we really wanted to reach those people. And I don't feel like we have yet. And I don't really necessarily think the humanists are that either. Like, you're probably more sympathetic, which is fantastic. But I'm hoping that Amazon Prime, people who are sympathetic will be like, Mom, Dad, Grandma, niece, nephew, watch this film on Amazon Prime. The people who, I don't think that the hardcore pro-Israel, pro-Likud, and the other like hard right parties are they're going to ever be persuaded, right? But there are some people in the middle who need to know that the propaganda that was out there that dominated is not the whole story by any means. So anyway, thank you for having me. And it's been, what I meant to say is that it's been actually a few months maybe since I've watched it. And I really appreciate the emotion because it's incredibly sad to watch it now and think about how many more people have died since we made the film and how there was hope in the movement that it could be stopped before such almost complete annihilation. And it wasn't stopped. And then, of course, it gets me every time to see the UW student. Because one life, Toni Morrison, when she wrote Beloved, criticized, Toni Morrison, brilliant, won the Pulitzer for Beloved. And it was about, the death of a girl who had her mom had escaped slavery, but the slave owners found her, and she killed her child to prevent her child from going back into slavery. And Toni Morrison wrote Beloved about that. And she was criticized as playing some kind of atrocities Olympics. And she said, it's not about how many have died. One little girl dying, that is enough for me. And I think of that every time I see the UW student. And then, of course, think about all or Hind, Hind is the young girl who is stuck in a car with all her dead relatives in the car with her. And who that the Columbia students named Hind Hall after. Anyway, it's incredibly sad. And I felt, it's sadder than ever today. Or I don't know, I probably felt very sad before, but yeah.
Yes.
City chooses to heed its students, faculty, and staff who are calling for divestment, it will lose state funding entirely. Their laws have been passed. So there's so much against any kinds of movements to boycott, but that still remains one of our best paths, I think. Sort of answering your question.
Thank you. A question from Kurt. How could the universities fail to explain that Zionism is ethnic exclusion similar to the violence of apartheid?
Love that question.
Yeah.
Love that question, because that is partly what motivated me to make this film with Jan, because I was in a situation where I was watching in real time my own university not explain that to students, and far from explaining, not mention the word Palestine, not mention the deaths that were going on, but regularly talking about, quote, vile and hateful speech, and strongly signaling that this was any kind of speech that was critical of Israel, and trying to say, we will prosecute you for hateful speech. We want what kind of community, sort of scolding the campus community for speech, and buying into the notion that this speech, of course, there are genuine anti-Semitic incidents and slurs and content, but by and large, that was not what was happening among the students.
A question from Amanda. Amanda Feller, can you come in? Amanda's an academic who teaches conflict and communication, so this should be a good question. Amanda, can you come in?
Uh-oh, I've set myself up.
Yes, you did.
And I did teach at Portland State in the 90s.
Oh, cool.
For quite some time in university studies and the communication department. And my area of expertise is conflict and dialogue work. And of course, very supportive of students' free speech on campuses, and taught issues around Palestine in my conflict classes. One of the issues that I think comes up that gets lost is the call for action among the students and faculty and staff too, is the divestment issue. And with state universities, that portfolio is determined by the state legislature. And so what conversations have you seen amongst the students that you worked with? Because that is portrayed, that call to action is in the film.
So, Lewis and Clark just divested.
They're private.
Yeah, right. But that's pretty friggin' amazing.
Yeah.
And because it felt like we feel like it's so much harder now than it's ever been. I want to also mention that, there's a lot in Portland, Oregonian and Willamette Week, a lot of condemnation of the occupation of the library. The Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights had actually been planning a peaceful rally for that evening when the library was occupied. And it was a Venn diagram, different sort of constellation of students that occupied the library. And the Hannah, who's in the film, and Natalie and Senna, who speak to a Coin News reporter and say, what we're seeing now about the clashes, she's absolutely right. They were not actually involved in occupying the library. In fact, they quietly, privately had some sadness about it being the library because Palestinians are so much about higher education and so much about trying to use resources to have class mobility or any kind of place, in the world. And so they were sad about it, but they would not criticize it because, there was a sense of like, we're not going to be talking about good and bad protesting right now while there's a genocide. But they're absolutely right that the clashes that happened towards the end are the result of a series of attempts at engagement that were blocked.
Questioner number 2. Friendly house. Go ahead.
Well, you already kind of answered my question a little bit when you pointed out that, about half the movie is more about free speech in the United States than Middle East politics.
Right.
But still, a lot of it's about Middle East politics, and it's entirely one-sided, right? Just lawyers kind of for the Palestinian view. So my question is, why not try to create understanding of both sides? Why not, for example, propose what Israel should have done after October 2023? Why not?
How would that have been both sides? What Israel should have done? If I were saying what Israel should have done, I would say it shouldn't have used disproportional violence. It shouldn't have used the human shield propaganda. It shouldn't have executed a genocide. That would still be consistent with the film I made.
But anyway, I didn't finish my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what should Israel do when Iran is calling for the destruction of Israel and developing nuclear weapons? Why not try to represent both sides and explain what Israel should do in response to these threats? Or do you think that Israel is just pure evil and Palestine is 100% right?
So one of the reasons why we didn't do a both sides kind of film is that in the US, people know the Israel side. We do. We've been raised with it. I was the kind of kid who read Diary of Anne Frank and got obsessed with what humans do to humans and got obsessed with the Shoah. And I teach Claude Lanzmann's 8-hour documentary, The Shoah, in my classes. And the idea of the fact that people were rendered stateless and that would lead to a desire to have your own state that will guarantee your rights, that's completely something that I think we're sympathetic to in the US and that we tend to understand in the US. When I ask my classes, how many of you know about the Holocaust or were taught about it in high school, lots of kids, all of them raise their hands. All of them have a lot to say. When I say, have you ever heard of the Nakba? They say no. And so there is one side by the establishment and the powerful groups in the US right now. We don't need to tell that side.
Thank you. Question 3.
Mother to 2 students at University of Washington. Where would be my best efforts of creating change or talking, or is it something like Amanda said, more going towards legislatures rather than to the college? Where would my best efforts be in creating?
As a parent who's paying tuition, you do have some leverage, right? So it's hard to say. It's so hard to say right now what is an effective path forward for any particular stakeholder positioned however they are. I'm not sure I can answer that question except maybe to ask for meetings with the top administrators to get to know the faculty and staff for justice and Palestine group at University of Washington and see what kinds of things they're doing and support them, the Students for Justice and Palestine. I don't know if your kids were involved. My kids are less political than me. You were involved? That's great. My kids I'm the most political in the family. So they were not, one had graduated and one was not. So, but if you could, because the students really suffered more than it's all relative compared to what happens to Palestinians in under the attack by Israel. So it's all relative, but nonetheless, at Portland State students, they were fined $5,000 and they weren't able to re-enroll for suspended for a year. And $5,000 is a lot of money to a Portland State student. So there was a lot of consequences for students and much fewer consequences until recently for faculty. So supporting the student groups, right now it feels like the only thing that figuring out if there's any kind of divestment campaign, I think is really important. But also doing the political education of people who remain ignorant about the history and the erasure of Palestinian lives and Palestinian narratives.
Okay. Question number 4. Thank you. Question number 4. Oh, there you go. There, Jan.
Just clarification. I picked up what I think I picked up from your presentation, the movie, is that students have protested since McCarthyism through civil rights, through Vietnam, etc., and been hammered by
Exactly.
the establishment.
Yeah.
And yet afterwards,
Yes.
the administration takes credit.
Exactly.
The university's making all
It becomes part of the brochures.
So I got that right. Isn't really feasible. It's a one-state solution. That's what I thought I heard.
Sorry, McDeasy, who's Edward Said's nephew who teaches at UCLA. That was him who made that point. Yeah.
Okay. Question number 5.
The right wing now with the Knesset and Netanyahu,
yes,
reminds me so much of an abused child who abuses as an adult.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any answer to that, but my question is there enough of a left wing in Israel that could actually be heard if we could move beyond the strength of the Knesset and Netanyahu? Where are we going?
So a good article. I'm not going to be able to remember. My brain feels like a sieve these days. There's a good article about the current issues facing Netanyahu around trying to, I'm not going to remember. It had to do with the Knesset. Never mind. I'm not going to really remember. I think I like your point, to go back to the first part of your question, and then I'll try to. I like your point about an abused child who turns around and abused. And I think that's certainly one of the part of the political education of the film, in the sense of both Judith Butler saying, someone who's suffered immense oppression can also inflict immense oppression. And Sophie Smith, who talks about how Jewish kids everywhere from the left to the right are recruited into this incredible existential fear through Holocaust education that makes one feel as if one is always under existential threat, regardless of whether you are facing any physical threat or at all. So I think that's a really good point. But as far as the Netanyahu stuff, what there for a while I was reading about how the left was getting smaller and smaller because people really rallied around what happened on October 7th and focused entirely on what happened on October 7th. And so that dominated all the airwaves in Israel. And a lot of what was happening by the Israeli army to Palestinians was not being shown on the news. So the left shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, apparently. I don't know now what I haven't kept up in the last few months on the politics in Israel, but I imagine that if there is a ceasefire, that people might start accounting for the devastation of the IDF, and the left might start to revive a little bit. Of course, the incredible sad thing is that what is left, and the power of Trump to turn everything into a marketable opportunity is just so obscene and shameless. And that's what I'm afraid is on the horizon.
Questioner number 6.
Concerning academic freedom in the United States and the student activism, it's been a year since this.
Yeah.
Has it changed? And what's it looking like now? Is it better or worse?
So I'm trying to write this article for a symposium at Georgetown that I'm going to go to next week, and it's going to be all faculty who are much more conservative than I am. So I'm very nervous about the article, but I'm making the argument that Palestine operated as there's something called the Palestine Exception. That's the title of the film, right? And the Palestine Exception to academic freedom and free speech, that we can talk about almost everything with our First Amendment rights, but not Palestine. So what has happened since the making of the movie is that Palestine is no longer the exception. It's the pretext or the wedge or the model of attacks on LGBTQ people, attacks on transgender and non-binary people, attacks on Black Americans and Black history. People are getting fired for supposedly being a DEI hire, or being removed and being replaced. But yet the attack on wokeness that wouldn't have had the ability to terrify universities and colleges into submission, i.e. into taking their fears of what the government is going to do and turning around and crushing academic freedom and free speech in anticipatory obedience of what they think is coming down the pike. I don't think that it could have be doing as much damage to other kinds of racial and social justice issues right now if it hadn't been able to do so much damage on the Palestine issue because of the long history of suppression of speech about Palestine.
Wow.
So now we've seen since the movie, we've seen more people fired for pro-Palestinian speech, but we're actually seeing now what I've read recently is the number of people fired for pro-Palestinian speech is now the number of people now fired after Charlie Kirk for saying that guy, Ezra Klein wrote something in the New York Times about how that he did politics the right way. So for people who were tweeting and saying, no, he didn't. He was hateful. He used clickbait. He went to campuses in order to find viral moments to push the right-wing campaigns. So people who criticize that, who have been terminated now, people who have gone to socialist conferences for decades and talked about, criticisms of capitalism and the long socialist horizon and what could be possible are now being fired when they're saying the same thing they said 2 years ago at a conference. So for me now, the Palestine made it possible to create this campaign of terror that has now bled into a number of other issues on camp for faculty, staff, and students.
Okay, thank you. Questioner number 7.
Okay.
So I'm a current student at the University of Washington, and recently our Board of Regents has made it very clear that we are not allowed to bring up any types of divestment to the board anymore. Yeah. And I believe it was last March, I think 30 students were arrested for protesting on campus.
Yeah.
So the entire sort of pro-Palestine movement at my university has effectively died out.
Yeah.
Because there's just no movement.
Because the repression is so strong and the wall that's been put up. Yeah.
So how would you recommend sort of bringing the movement back and gaining that momentum that we had lost?
It's interesting because when we finished the film and it was showing it on a number of campuses, there was already total exhaustion, and the suspensions and the punishments were already happening. And so people came, and there was just and we originally thought, well, the film should be used on campuses for people to come and talk about, okay, what's next? To meet, watch, and then be like, okay, what's our next organizing move? But people were so exhausted. But the film functioned at that time to validate and affirm students and to sort of make them be like, we accomplished a lot. Forget what's being said about us. Forget all this pro-Hamas terrorist stuff. Forget all this fear. We were on the right side of history. And so it was very moving and meaningful. Now we're a year out, right? Yeah, we are. We're a year out. And Trump is just, made it so much more the authoritarian level of this country around free speech and academic freedom. And there's 60 anti-Semitism investigations that are pending, and they can just that's what they use to then revoke federal funding. And I want to tell you that I was the faculty steward who went with faculty who were under investigation with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Equity and Compliance, and worked with and also knew about what the Department of Education did in those investigations. They're not running real investigations now. They're not following procedures. They're not actually having findings with evidence before they come to a Columbia, a Harvard, a Penn, a Brown, and say, we find that you were deliberately indifferent to anti-Semitism, and we're going to pause and revoke your federal funding unless you do X, Y, and Z. So there's no credibility to their threats, but it takes the courts so long to work, and the courts are so unreliable right now that administrations I feel like they have a choice, but they think they have no choice. So we're in the larger context is shifted a bit and made it so that administrators are just as, if not more likely to try to crush any kind of movement. So I think you have to be willing to make sacrifices. And I don't want to say that to students. I want to say that I'm 56. If I get fired, I've had a great run. And my kids are mostly through college. I can take risks. I hesitate to tell young people to take risks. Not a great answer.
Dr. Ruth, we are at the end of our questions. Thank you so much, audience, for being succinct and that everybody got their questions in. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much.